Homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. Thanks for joining me in my kitchen and on my farm because we're going to walk around and look at some different things. I thought I would put together a Christmas holiday shopping list for homesteaders who are just getting into food preservation. So if you are just getting into food preservation, or if somebody in your family is just getting into food preservation and people are asking, hey, what should I put on your Christmas list? I have some ideas for you. And so we will break this down into kind of small ticket items that just make life easier and a lot more pleasurable to work in the kitchen, some big ticket items that are definitely more of a splurge or something that you save up for, and some other just recommendations along the way that I've come up with. I have been canning, I'm not even sure how long, but well over 20 years. So it's been quite a long time and quite a long journey. I didn't start pressure canning until 6 or 7 years ago. So that is fairly new to me, and it has really opened up a whole new world. But I've been doing all kinds of food preservation for many, many years, and have definitely kind of taken a very deep dive into it in the last 10 years. So I'm going to show you the things that have helped me process not just small amounts of food, but large volumes of food. If you have a big garden, or if you're buying cases of things at farmers markets and you're doing kind of all day or all weekend food preservation, these are the kind of things that you need that are not typically found in a small, typical kitchen. Let's get started first with some book recommendations. The first book that I ever bought to learn how to can was this one. It didn't look like this one. I bought it. It was a different color because it was an earlier edition. If you have an old version of this, please buy a new one. Things change over time. The science changes and becomes a little bit more clear, and certain processes and procedures change a little bit. And so it's always helpful to have the most recent edition of this, or at least the one that's been in the last 10 years or so. So this is a beginning canning book that most people get started with. It is not organized in the way that I would organize it if it were up to me, but it is really good for beginners in terms of walking you through step by step, both water bath canning and pressure canning. And then it has great advice in here as well on freezing, particularly vegetables. So if you're blanching and freezing things, like how long you need to blanch for and that kind of thing. So really great beginner get started book. This is from Ball, and it is definitely considered a bit of a Bible. The other kind of deep dive is this book, which is called So Easy to Preserve. And this is put out by the Cooperative Extension at the University of Georgia, and that is home for the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And so anytime I'm doing something new, a new process, and I want to cross-check, or I see some recipe someplace and I want to double-check and see if that makes sense or if that's the way that a tested recipe would be done, I tend to go to the National Center for Home Food Preservation website and look it up there and just cross-check and make sure that everything is the same. These are the guys that are actually getting paid by the US government to do the testing on procedures. And so this book, again, a little old-fashioned, a little funky the way it's organized, and it helps if you have kind of the first book that I showed you as a bit of a beginning, but tons and tons and tons of recipes in here and really great information. You can only order this directly from them. You can't find this on Amazon. I ordered it directly from them. I'll put the price up on the screen, but really great, amazing resource. Like if you were only gonna have one canning book for the rest of your life, this is probably what you should get. The other one that I just recently bought, and I teach some canning classes, and so I actually bought a copy of this and a copy of the other Ball canning book, which I'll show you here in a second, so that I could show my students in my class what was out there in terms of reliable, tested resources for recipes. And so I bought this mostly for the class. I didn't really think I needed it. I just wanted to have it as a show and tell piece. And then it turned out I love this canning book. There is a bunch of new recipes in here that are not in the original Ball canning book, and it's a little more up to date in terms of just current tastes. And so there's some really great information in here, some fun recipes that are a little bit more ethnic. There's some nice mix and match. They have pages like this where this is simple 1-jar vegetables, and they give you a grid, and then you can, like, it's a bunch of different recipes for carrots, where one of them is like ginger honeyed carrots, and one of them is curried carrots, and one of them is herbed carrots. So it gives you some new versions of things instead of just canning carrots. So really fun, really some creative ideas. I've made, you can see the number of flags in here. I did a ton of stuff out of this, and I've still got some things I haven't gotten to. And then the other thing I really love about this is there's a whole section on curing meats. And so things like making like tasso ham, for instance, which is a common ingredient in Cajun cooking, and you can almost never find tasso ham in a grocery store. So really nice there. A recipe for making your own pancetta. So again, something that is really expensive at the store, which you can make pretty easily at home. Cold cured salmon, and then some condiment stuff as well. There's a recipe in here for Dijon mustard that I've yet to make that is on my list. And there's a recipe for homemade Worcestershire sauce in here, which is also on my list of things to try. So really great. Love this canning book. Highly, highly recommend it. And you can see, yeah, it's well used, and I've still got things to do. This is the other ball book that is out. That's not a duplicate of the other one. You can buy this as a spiral bound, or you can buy it as just a regular bound. I got the spiral bound because these tend to wear better. I got this one again as a show and tell for the classes that I teach. I don't love this as much, and it could just be the way I cook compared to what the recipes that are in here, but I did not find quite as much inspiration in this book, although there is a recipe in here for carrot cake jam that I've had flagged for some time that I just think would be a really fun thing to try. And what else do I have flagged in here just for fun? A red onion marmalade. So it's red onions, but with orange zest and apple juice. I thought that sounded quite interesting. Ginger pear marmalade. There's a lot of jam recipes in here is what I'm remembering, and a lot of sauce and fruit stuff. So I do a lot of sauce and fruit stuff already. That's kind of where you start when you're a beginning canner, is with fruits. And so I've done a lot of that already, and I'm pretty set in my ways. But this is the other alternative. I don't recommend this as much as I recommend the other one. So there's some great resource books to get you started in terms of canning. If you're buying for yourself or for a person who's brand new to canning, there are a couple of pieces of equipment that you will need that are small. One of them is some kind of a funnel, and you want a canning funnel specifically that will fit into both regular and wide mouth jars. I like a stainless steel. I don't love plastic, and the fact that plastic scratches and wears over time, and you always wonder what's in it. So I prefer a stainless steel. These are available on Amazon, and they're not super expensive. You're gonna want a jar lifter. These are for lifting hot jars out of the boiling water or out of the pressure canner. Absolutely indispensable. There's a bunch of different kinds. Most of them are more than adequate. This one is made by Ball. It's nice to have Ball stuff because they're usually pretty solid. And then another thing is, this is a measuring tool for debubbling, and so you can put it in the jar and release any bubbles that are in there before you put your lids on. But it also has this cool little stair step at the top that helps you measure headspace. And so if you want an inch of headspace, a 3/4 of an inch of headspace, honestly, I've never seen a recipe with 3/4 of an inch of headspace, 1/2 inch of headspace, or 1/4 inch of headspace. After a while, you do get a pretty good visual, and you can judge that just by eye. And there's also usually a good graphic in the canning books, but this is really nice when you're brand new to learn where that line is, particularly for an inch headspace. Inch base is harder to tell, and particularly if you have an assortment of old canning jars that are different manufacturers, it can vary a little bit in terms of where that line actually is, and so these are really helpful. So those are some small things that are super helpful when you get started with canning that are nice little stocking stuffers. If you think you're going to be making a lot of jam or larger batches of things as you preserve, having a decent sized heavy bottomed pot that is not super deep can be really helpful. Having this much surface area is really good for when you're evaporating things down. And so this is really great for jam. This is my standard jam pot, and it's just a Tramontina. So I got this at Walmart, but it's got a heavy, you can see that line there. It's got a very heavy bottom. That's really helpful when you have stoves that have slightly different settings and you've got a lot of sugar in a product and a lot of natural sugar in the fruit itself, and you can easily overheat and scorch things. And so having a heavy bottom kind of evens out the heat and makes things a lot more consistent. So a good heavy bottomed pot for things like jams and chutneys and those sauces, this can be really, really helpful and not super expensive. So this is one of my canning pots. I actually have several. This is stainless. I'm not a fan of aluminum because of the possible health risks involved, and so I don't tend to use aluminum for things. However, you notice this does not look like the standard canning pot that you see at the grocery store when they're selling canning supplies, what they call granite ware. I don't love granite ware. I have bought several of those over the years, and the problem with them is the enamel that's on them does not stay well, and then they chip and then they rust, and then the rack that comes with it also rusts. It's maddening, and so I don't use those. This is really, really thin stainless, so this is not a good pot for doing anything besides boiling liquid in. I would not use this for jams. I would not use this for anything that had any density to it, but it is great for just using for canning or for doing something like apple juice or something really liquid. In the bottom of this, I have a stainless steel trivet that I bought on Amazon. I will link to that in the list. This is just a rack to put on the bottom of this to keep the jars from the bottom of the pot. The reason for that in canning is because if the water is boiling really hard and you've got glass jars in there, the glass jars will bounce around and bounce into each other. You don't have to have the kind of rack that has the individual little holes for the jars, as long as you've got something to keep it off of the bottom. And honestly, the other thing that I use a lot is this plastic trivet that's silicone. If I'm double stacking, this is what I use to double stack. This also works. It's not quite big enough to fit the bottom of the pot. So you can buy specialty products, but even washcloths or dish towels will work. But thin bottomed, large size, this is probably at least 4 gallons, maybe 5. What I like about this is it's a little bit wider than the standard canning pots that you buy, and so I can get a few more jars in here. So big canning pot doesn't have to be expensive, but very handy, and I prefer stainless if you can find it. But I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have large containers. When you're dealing with food that's more than just a pound or two that you would buy at the grocery store, you really need some big containers to put things in. This is a 5-gallon pot that I bought at an estate sale, and we use it for a lot of different things, including scalding chickens when we're processing chickens. This one has a heavy bottom, so it's kind of like that Tramontina that I showed you earlier. You can see this big heavy bottom on here. This is a little better for cooking things down if they have some density to them. Do know, however, if you fill this almost all the way up with something that's got a lot of sugar in it, like pears. I tried to do pear butter in this one time and slowly cook it down, and I burned it on the bottom, because there's a point where if your heat source is all here, that the material in here is just not going to circulate enough unless you're standing there stirring it for hours, who has the patience for that, and it will scorch on the bottom just because of the weight and the density of what's in there. So not good for that. Roasting pans are better for that. Crock pots are better for that. But big stainless steel pot, you will find many, many, many uses for it. They are well worth having if you can find them. A large cutting board. This is from a restaurant supply store, and it can be bleached. It's plastic. I know wood is more preferred in a lot of cases, and I do use a wood cutting board as well, but this is nice because it can be bleached if you're doing something that you want to make sure that it's bleached afterwards. It doesn't look like it's been bleached, it's stained, but that doesn't matter. But a big cutting board, this is, I don't know what the size is on this, I'll put it on the screen, but considerably larger than a typical home cutting board. Really nice if you're processing a lot of product. And then really big stainless steel bowls. Stainless steel because if you accidentally drop them, they're not going to break. And also because stainless steel is inert, and so you're not going to have any problem with putting like acidic tomatoes into a metal bowl. It's not going to be a problem. This is my biggest one. I bought this at an estate sale, and I am amazed at how often I use this. Very, very handy for lots of different things. This is more of a standard size from a restaurant supply store. I have several of those. And then everything else here I just picked up at estate sales over the years. And so again, this can be a long-term process. You just keep an eye out for things and pick them up when you see them, when they're a good size. but multiple bowls. There was a point this summer when every single one of these bowls had something in it. I was full up. So yeah, having big bowls. This is a hotel steam pan, and I would not have bought this except for the fact that I ran across it at an estate sale, and I think I paid $5 for it. Again, stainless. I have one that is deeper as well. So I have 4 of these and one that's deeper. Fantastic, again, for large volumes of food. If you're processing a ton of tomatoes, if you can't afford or don't want to buy this, then the alternative would be half sheet pans. And those half sheet pans are like a big cookie sheet with a rim. You will use those every day for all kinds of things. So half sheet pans is my go-to. I happen to have these because I picked them up for a screaming deal at an estate sale. But again, large container, very, very nice to have. Other things I use for processing all the time is a large size crock pot, and you can pick these up used at thrift stores. You don't have to buy one brand new, but big sized crock pots are really great for making butter. So if you want to make apple butter or pear butter or tomato jam, things that are sticky and dense and need to cook down for a very, very long period of time, those are awesome and definitely a way to go. If you think you want to be doing dehydrating, this is kind of the first tier dehydrator. This is a Nesco American Harvest that I've had for, gosh, probably 20 years. I think the actual model has changed quite a bit, but the Nesco, I believe, is still out here. The 2 absolute must-haves with any kind of dehydrator are, you've got to have a fan. This one, the fan is in the top. That needs to be cleaned. And you've got to have some kind of a temperature gauge, because the temperature at which you will dry herbs is about 95 degrees. The temperature that you will dry things like apples and fruit is 135 degrees. And if you're making homemade jerky, you're going to want to be up at 155 degrees. So you really need some kind of a temperature regulation in there. Do not buy dehydrators that don't have that. What I like about this is it's inexpensive and it's easy to clean. And these are trays for making fruit leathers. And then it's also stackable, so you can buy additional trays and stack this up. What I don't like about this is, one, it's all plastic. And so I'm not wild about that compared to things that are metal. And then secondly, it's a circle. And so it's not a lot of volume. You've got a hole in the middle. If you're making things like fruit leathers, they're going to be a weird shape and it's not ideal. So not a ton of surface area on this. So here we have a few more items that are a little bit more specialty items, but will really make your life a lot easier. And the first one is just a kitchen scale. This one is a my weight scale because I use it for soap making. I'm a soap maker as well, but OXO makes a very nice kitchen scale, and that's what I have in my downstairs kitchen. And I literally use it constantly. But if you're canning and the recipe says start with 5 pounds of apples, you need to know how many apples you have to make 5 pounds. And so having a kitchen scale is huge. Very, very handy, definitely. And once you start using a scale, honestly, you'll find that you use it constantly. It's great for baking recipes and other things as well. So kitchen scale, definitely a must-have in my book. This is a little more of a specialty item for sure, and I didn't have one for years and years, and I've wanted one, but they were really expensive, and I just thought, gosh, do I really need it that bad? This is called a chinois. And I ended up finally finding one at an estate sale. And so I can't remember what I paid for this, but it was a screaming deal because these are normally $60 or $70. And I have used this so much. If you're making like hot sauce and you need to strain out the cooked peppers, and if you watched my hot sauce videos, you've seen me use it for that. Really great for applesauce. Basically great for things where you need to push something through. And then this, you put the food in there, and then this little thing goes along and squishes things out through the holes. Really an amazing tool, and I find that I use it more than I thought I would. The alternative to that you will use as frequently or more frequently, but it's a little more awkward in my opinion than this is a food mill. And so this is a standard, again, stainless steel, big fan of stainless. This is a stainless steel food mill. I've probably had this for 20 plus years at least. I bought it at a hardware store, but I will put a link to the one on Amazon that America's Test Kitchen recommends. The way this works is these plates come out, and so you can decide if you want a fine mesh strainer, a medium mesh strainer, or a coarse mesh strainer. But if you're making things like plum jam, this is really nice for just like you cook the plums and then you run it through this mill and you get rid of the seeds and the skins without having to individually seed everything. Wildly helpful. Again, good for applesauce, good for hot sauces and those kind of things. Very handy and really easy to use for the most part. Can be a little more tedious, I think, than the chinois, but definitely worth having. The other thing that I find really handy, this is actually just a metal coffee filter. So it's a permanent coffee filter so that you don't have to buy paper coffee filters. I have a couple plastic versions of this as well with metal mesh that are gold. This is really nice for straining things when you want a clear product. So if you're making things like chicken stocks and those kind of things, very, very handy for fine mesh straining. I use this a lot. And so having one of these is very handy. And again, I like that it's faster than an actual coffee filter. Actual paper coffee filters, they tend to clog up very quickly and can be super tedious to wait for something to strain through. And washable, so you can just throw this in the dishwasher when you're done. Really, really handy. So a little bit more of a specialty product. And then now we're gonna get into things that are specific to a particular crop. So this is an apple corer and peeler. And these are pretty standard. There's a bunch of different versions of this out there. This part, the part that cores, you can loosen this bolt up and move that out of the way if for some reason you want to hand slice the apples. What this does is a spiral slicer, and so it will give you spirals. And sometimes you don't want a spiral. Sometimes you want chunks, like you're making apple pie filling to can and you want it to be in chunks. So you can take that coring part out and then just hand slice, but really nice for peeling apples quickly. And there's an old-fashioned antique version that my parents had that was a much more elaborate machine. My dad had a fire in his shop and it disappeared from that, and unfortunately I didn't inherit it, and I've looked for one ever since. I really want the old-fashioned kind that I grew up with. This is for tomatoes, and there's a bunch of different names for this. Sauce Master Food Strainer. This is Norpro. There's a bunch of different versions out here. If you can, try to get one where this part is stainless, again, because they tend to rust otherwise. This one that I have, I don't believe is stainless, and so it's a little bit of a mess. But if you're planning on making a lot of things like ketchup and barbecue sauce and tomato paste and tomato sauce, where you're gonna need to strain out the seeds and the peels, this is a must-have. It's absolutely essential. And what you wanna do is cook your tomatoes first so that they're softened up, and then you put it through this strainer. The juice and the pulp comes out here. The skins and the peels come out here, and then you take the skins and the peels and you run it back through a second time, and you will get amazing quality tomato product out of this with no seeds and no peels. So definitely a must-have if you're planning on doing a lot of work with tomatoes. This little doohickey is a corn stripper, and this is an OXO product. OXO makes just generally good products. They almost always end up coming out on top when America's Test Kitchen does tests for things. So this will strip the corn kernels off the cob. And I've bought other versions of this at other times and had them break within probably 10 cobs of corn, which is maddening when you're planning on canning or freezing a lot of corn. This one has not broken. I actually own 2 of them. It is a great tool, highly recommended, not super expensive, but worth having if you're planning on doing a lot of processing of corn. Much faster than doing it with a knife. I have done a ridiculous amount of work with cherries over the years, because one of the products that I've sold is cherry jam. And so I needed something to pit cherries with. And so I just kept trying different cherry pitters. This was the one that was recommended by America's Test Kitchen. And so I bought this. This one is just a little single hand one where you put the cherry in. It also works for olives. Put the cherry in and push it, and it pushes the pit out. This is similar. You put the cherry in there and this pushes the pit through. I think this is technically actually an olive pitter, but I bought it to use for cherries, and the spring on this is surprisingly tight, and so you wouldn't want to do a bowl full of cherries with this because your hand would wear out. And then this is actually my favorite, and there's different versions of this on Amazon. They all seem to work. It actually is similar to like a staple. And so what you do is you put your individual cherries in these holes, and then you just press down and it pushes the pit through, and the pits end up in the bottom, and then you just pick this up and toss this in a bowl. For speed, I find this actually faster than this. This is supposed to be fast because you can put individual cherries in the hopper and they're supposed to come through one at a time. It kind of works, but not super great. So I would, if you're gonna do a lot of cherry processing, if you have cherry trees and you think you're gonna wanna make a lot of cherry jam, or frozen cherries, and you don't want to deal with the pits, but you need to pit the individual cherries and not just put them through a food mill like this, I would say go with this or go with this. I've spent many an evening sitting on the couch watching television and pitting giant bowls of cherries with this little pitter, so it works pretty good. So those are all kind of specialty things specific to individual types of products. I'm not a big fan of unitaskers. I don't typically own things that I can only use for one thing, but for certain things, it is very handy. So an apple peeler, a cherry pitter, a corn stripper, and then definitely, like, first and foremost, some kind of sauce tomato processing. Those are all really great gifts and really great if you're planning on putting a lot of canned product on your shelves or even in your freezer. Bonus points if you are going to be doing a lot of food processing, or if you're going to be storing a lot of food in bulk. This is called a gamma lid, and this is a food grade bucket. I originally had coconut oil in here because I'm a soap maker, but you can get food grade buckets usually for free from big box stores that have bakeries, because they get icing and things like that in these, and once they're empty, you just clean them out and they're free and you know they're food grade. But this snaps over the rim of this bucket, and usually you have to use like a rubber mallet to get it on. It's a little hard to get on, and then it's just turns this bucket into a screw top opening. So there's a white seal on there, so it makes it airtight, and they literally just screw on. And so these are really, really nice for bulk things. Like, this is sugar in this. This is a 6-gallon bucket, and it will hold 25-pound bag of sugar. I have another one down here. This is salt, because I'm doing a lot of processing that needs salt, and so this is really handy for that. But I have one for oats, I have one for flour, I have one for whole wheat berries that I grind myself. And so basically you can't have too many of these. They are really fabulous for holding things. I'm not trying to store anything for 25 years. There are people who get really into freeze dryers and Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers, and they're trying to store stuff for the apocalypse. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to store things for a year, maybe 2, with my canning jars. Things that are in my pantry, I store things for up to 3 years, and if I haven't used it in 3 years, I open the jar, feed it to the chickens, and reuse the jar. Because if I haven't used it in 3 years, it's clearly not something we're that interested in eating, and I need to just let those sunk costs go and use that jar for something else. Speaking of canning jars, I sell spices and herbs in mixes. So these are my dried chilies and dried spices, the vast majority of which actually come from my own farm. So these are things that I'm growing myself. And so I have need for big containers because of this, but you cannot have too many mason jars. I'm really trying to get away from using plastic for storage when at all possible. And these are airtight if you put a regular lid on them, and you can use reused canning lids. If you carefully take your canning lids off, you can reuse them for things like this. Do not reuse them for a second round of canning, but they're fine to reuse for this. This is just Sharpie on here, and the rubbing alcohol will take that off, and so you can relabel things and have it be a permanent label. But these are half-gallon jars, half-gallon mason jars, and the only thing half-gallon mason jars are good for and safe for in terms of actual canning are things like apple juice or grape juice. Really, really not dense liquids can be canned in these. So I rarely ever use them for actual canning, but for dry goods storage, for everything from herbs and spices to pastas to, raw sugar that I use in my tea, you cannot have enough of these half-gallon jars. They are really, really fantastic. And so that would also be a great gift for somebody who's just trying to get away from using plastic for storage. And the other nice thing about this is if you've ever had pantry moths, you know what a nightmare that is. Pantry moths will not get into these because they're glass and they're sealed. And so it's not like having a cardboard container in your cupboard. So yes, every possible size and shape of mason jars is worth having for sure. Along that same note, if you've got somebody in your life who is a canner already, just extra canning supplies are really nice. So this is just a standard box of wide mouth lids and bands from Care or Core, which is basically Ball. They're all the same company at this point. However, the quality on these has dropped somewhat. They're not what they used to be. And if you buy cheap knockoffs on Amazon from China, they're really going to be bad. These are my new favorite thing. This is 4 jars, not a sponsored post. I just really like them. I started buying these during COVID when canning supplies were really short and I could not find bulk canning lids and it was making me crazy. So this is 100 lids of regular mouth and then I buy 100 lot of the wide mouth as well. I've had 0 failures with these. It's a really great product. And you can always find a discount code. So just Google discount codes. Lots and lots of YouTubers have sponsored posts with these and discount codes. But this would be great for somebody who is already a canner or just starting out in canning as a bulk supply. And, you know, lid for lid, these come out, they're not cheaper necessarily, but the quality on them is really, really excellent. So this would be another great stocking stuffer, is just 100 canning lids of regular mouth and 100 of wide mouth. You can see up here, I'm not going to get it out, but up there is a roasting pan. Roasting pans are, and there's my other really big 5-gallon pot up there. Roasting pans are really nice for doing things like tomato sauce. And so that is worth having. However, I just got one last year and I've been canning and processing for over 20 years. So not an absolute requirement, but very nice to have if you happen to see one. They are not as cheap as they used to be. You used to be able to pick them up for $30 or $40, and they now cost often over $100. Look for them right after Thanksgiving. They tend to go on sale right after the holiday, or maybe right before. The next step up from a dehydrator like this, which is kind of your beginning dehydrator, would be something like this. So this is an Excalibur. I'll put the model number on the screen. And this is a 9-tray Excalibur dehydrator. Again, the fan is in the back on this one, and then the temperature is on the top. These have these plastic trays. Not super easy to clean, not my favorite, but certainly very cleanable, and amazingly, stuff does not stick to this very much, which is really nice. 9 trays. I wish it was 10 trays because a lot of times if you're drying something, this is a really small space. And if you're drying something like peppers, they're too big and you can't do 9 trays. And so you have to take out every other tray and then you can only do 4 and not 5. So I wish it was a 10 tray and not a 9 tray. The door on this literally just hangs on these corners. There's no snap, there's no lock, there's no nothing. It seems very weird, but it works. And that's so that there's some airflow outside of it. This is the much more expensive Excalibur. This one has a timer on it, and the trays in it are stainless. I bought this from a fellow farmer who was not using it anymore, and so I got a pretty good deal on it. Very similar in design though, although it is a 10 tray, so you can put 5 in here. The one thing I love about this is it has a tray on the bottom to catch drips. The biggest caveat about this one is that it doesn't have a tray in the bottom, and so if you're doing something really drippy, it can drip down there into the bottom of this thing, and then it actually will run back behind the screen that is between the fan and the front. And it is very, very, very hard to clean. Ask me how I know. I once did some really ripe apricots and regretted it. So I love that this has a tray in the bottom. I like that these are stainless, although things stick to this a lot more than they stick to the plastic sheets. And this has a timer, which is nice, although I can never judge how long I need to time things for, and so inevitably I have to fiddle with things a bunch. This is a much, much, much more expensive dehydrator, and what's funny is when I use this one and this one side by side, this one dries things faster. So better air circulation and better design in terms of actual use, and so I actually have 2 of the black one. I bought a second one instead of buying another one of these. So I don't love this. The other thing I really dislike about it is the only way to get these trays out is these doors have to be parallel in order for that to fit. It just barely fits. If you do this, which is what you instinctively want to do, you can't get the trays out. So really dumb design in terms of the engineering. So yeah, don't love this as much, not worth the extra money, just go with this. But this is a step up. much bigger surface area in terms of drying things than the little Nescos over there. One more for you, along with the food processor, is a really good blender. And so I've had inexpensive blenders my whole life, you know, just whatever off the shelf from a big box store. I finally, after 30 years, bought a Vitamix. And so this was a reconditioned Vitamix off of Amazon. So I got a pretty good deal on it. If you're a Costco person, Costco often has them on sale. And in fact, I know they're on sale right now for a really good price. But if you're going to be doing a lot of grinding of powders, like say you make something with peppers and you've got a lot of leftover pulp that you want to dry and then grind to use in things, it doesn't get better than this. This blender will tackle things that most blenders are not able to tackle. You can see the residue in here is I've been grinding peppers into pepper powder, and so that's just left over from that, but I found this is about as good as you could possibly get. I can fill this whole thing up and turn it into pepper powder in less than a minute. So incredible product, highly recommend, worth the money, definitely a big spend. I'm glad I had it and I wish I hadn't waited as long as I did. So this is my Presto pressure canner. And I'll put the year that I bought this up here. I've probably owned it for about 5 years. And this is a 16 quart, I believe. And I wish I had bought the 23 quart. I bought the 16 quart because I wasn't going to be doing huge batches of pressure canning. And it turns out that if I had bought the 23 quart, I could have also used this pot for water bath canning. But the way this thing is currently designed, this looks like it would fit right now, but if you put a quart jar in here, with pressure canning, the water level actually only comes up to about here. You can see that stain line on there. That's where the water level comes up to. It's 3 quarts. So you don't fill it all the way up when you're pressure canning. The pressure in the steam is part of what's doing the work. With water bath canning, the water has to be over the top of the jars. And with this one, if I fill this with jars and try to have the water over the top of the jars by an inch, which is what's required, it's too full. And when it's boiling, it spills over and it's a huge mess. And so unfortunately, I cannot use this for water bath canning quart jars. I can use it for water bath canning pint jars because they're shorter and that does work. But I can't do double duty with this because it's only a 16 quart. I wish I had bought the 23 quart for that reason. The 23 quart was a little bit more expensive. I've actually seen them almost dollar for dollar the same price. So it's worth buying the 23 quart if you can afford it. Presto is a really solid brand. It's what is recommended on homesteading groups over and over and over again in terms of what should I buy if I'm buying a pressure canner. The thing to know about this is it does come with a gauge. You're supposed to have your gauge checked once a year by your county extension office to make sure it's accurate if you're using the gauge for canning, and that is the key. If you're not paying attention to what the gauge says and you're just using a weighted measure, if this is jiggling, then you're at the pressure that it's supposed to be at, because anything over that is going to gas off, and so it's never going to go over the pressure that this is weighted for. This is a 10-pound weight. I am below 1,000 feet in sea level. And if you're below 1,000 feet, most canning recipes for pressure canning are going to be 10-pound weight, not 15. And so I bought this separate. This is actually a multi-piece weight. This alone is 5 pounds. With one ring on it, it's 10 pounds. And then there's a second ring that I can put on here that makes it 15 pounds. If you're over 1,000 feet in elevation, the pressure changes and you can either use the gauge and judge it from there, which is honestly a pain in the ass because you're constantly having to watch it. You really can't leave the room at all because it's gonna vary, and if it gets too high, you're in trouble. Although this is always here as an extra off gas. But you can also just do most recipes. If you're over 1,000 feet in elevation, you can do everything at 15 pounds instead of 10 pounds of pressure and do the same thing, where if this is gently rocking and jiggling, you're at the pressure that you need to be at and you don't need to pay attention to the gauge. So all that drama about finding your county extension office, making sure that they can actually test. I don't think my county extension office even has the ability to test these because it's very small and very understaffed. Maybe they can, I don't know, but that's a big thing to have to do every year, and so I just use the weighted measure instead of the gauge. So get one with a gauge, don't get one with the gauge. It's not that critical, but don't worry too much about the gauge as long as you're using the weight. The other brand that is constantly recommended is called the All-American. The difference is the All-American, see how this has a seal? This has a rubber gasket in here. This rubber gasket will wear out over time, and you can have a situation where it starts to leak and it won't hold pressure because the gasket needs to be replaced. By the way, it's worth buying a second gasket to just have on hand so that you don't have to scramble to get one of those when you need it, particularly because pressure canners change and the designs change and you may not be able to get the exact same one that you need. So when you order your pressure canner, just get a second rubber gasket. But if you're using the All-American, there is no gasket. It is simply 2 pieces of metal that are very, very finely machined so that they fit together tightly and make a seal. The beauty of that is your gasket's never going to run out, and as long as you treat it gently, you literally will pass that down to your kids and your grandkids. All-Americans never wear out. They are minimum of at least double the price of a Presto like this, so they're out of my price range. I would love to own one, but I don't because they're very expensive. But that is the other recommendation that you see all the time for pressure counters. So Presto or All-American. Last but by no means least is a food processor. And this was the kind of thing that took me a long time to buy. And the first one I got, I think, was a hand-me-down. And getting a good quality one is worth the extra money. This is a Cuisinart 14 cup. This is the one that is recommended by America's Test Kitchen. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with this. I had a KitchenAid food processor that I really, really loved, and it got to the point where I could no longer get parts for it. Eventually, these plastic bowls do wear out or crack, or you drop them or something happens to them and you need to replace them. And it got to the point where I could no longer get parts for the KitchenAid. So I had to buy this as a replacement because the new models of the KitchenAid were not nearly as good as the old ones. I was really bummed because the food processor itself still worked perfectly, but I couldn't get parts for it. And so this is a Cuisinart. It works great. The one thing I dislike about it is that the feed tube is in the back instead of in the front. Almost every food processor I've ever used, it's in the front. It makes sense. You're standing in front of it, you're pushing the buttons, you're feeding things into it. Why reach over the unit to feed things in? I do not know why they put this in the back. And what happens is when you go to put this on, you put it on backwards. You put the lid on backwards because you forget that it's in the back and not the front. And if you put it on this way, which is the way it logically should go, it jams and then it takes forever to get it apart and you're worried about breaking off little pieces. And so, yeah, not my favorite design because of that. But other than that, really works great. I love this unit. I have it upstairs in my commercial kitchen as well as down here. When you're making things like salsa, this will save you so much time. When you don't care if every piece is precision, you know, 1/4 inch or something like that. When you're doing cowboy candy, I use the slicing plate on this to run things through here. You've seen me use this machine in video after video after video. You will use it in your everyday life as well as your food processing life. It is really fantastic and well worth having. And so, yeah, a food processor, definitely add that to the list. All right, tribe, so that's the end of my Homesteader food processing Christmas list guide. I hope it was helpful to you, not just in terms of having individual things recommended, but a little bit on the why behind things, which I find is always helpful for knowing what to look for because, you know, somebody could be watching this 5 years from now and half the models that I have linked below, by the way, almost everything is linked below. You know, those things may not be relevant in 5 years, but if you know what to look for and sizes and things like that, you can get equivalents of newer things that still meet the same kind of needs and desires. So happy holidays to all. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope it was fantastic and that you got to spend some time eating wonderful local food and spending time with loved ones. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.